Tuesday was Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday, and I didn't see one single media mention of the fact that Ronald Reagan stole the 1980 election from him by cutting a deal with the Ayatollah to hold the hostages. Not one. Did you? I mean, if you did, let me know, but not one. Jack Smith is highlighting these new, shocking truths about Donald Trump, and we'll talk about those more as we go through the program. They're not saying, hey, by the way, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and those guys and Richard Nixon pretty much did the same thing. George Herbert Walker Bush had Kuwaitis come over here and lie to Congress so that he could have his short little war that he thought would help him get reelected in 1992. Didn't work out for him. The war wasn't long enough. As his son pointed out to his biographer, Mickey Herskowitz, George W. Bush said, if I become president, I'm going to have a longer war, and I'm going to get everything done, and I'm going to have a successful presidency. But our media doesn't talk about this. It's like we're operating in a historical vacuum. Nixon committed treason in 1968. He blew up the negotiations, or actually they had reached a final agreement between LBJ and the South and North Vietnamese, and he did it by going to the South Vietnamese and saying, the South Vietnamese president, and saying, I'll make you rich. And, just don't go to Paris. Don't go to those peace talks and sign that deal. And that, handed the election to Nixon in '68. He committed treason. Reagan did the same thing. As I mentioned, George Herbert Walker Bush lied and had other people lie on his behalf to have his little war for his election. His son, George W. Bush, only became president because Catherine Harris, his Secretary of State, was able to invent a brand new category of ballot. She called it a spoiled ballot. This is what the New York Times reported a year after the 2000 election. While 35,176 voters wrote in Bush's name while punching the hole for him, 80,000 wrote in Gore's name while punching the hole for Gore. Catherine Harris decided these were spoiled ballots because they were both punched and written on and ordered that none of them should be counted. Many were from African-American districts where older and often broken machines were distributed, causing voters to write on their ballots so their intent would be unambiguous. That would have been a 45,599 vote victory for Al Gore if Catherine Harris had not decided, all on her own, not to count those ballots. And that's why the Supreme Court of Florida ordered a recount that the U.S. Supreme Court, 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court, with Clarence Thomas being the deciding vote, and he was appointed by George Bush's daddy, said, we're going to stop the recount and we're going to hand the election to George Bush. And nobody talks about this. And frankly, I'm outraged that the media doesn't talk about it. I'm also very concerned that Democrats don't talk about this. You can bet your bottom dollar if Democrats had screwed Republicans in every presidential election since the 1950s, that Republicans would be squealing about it every day. But Democrats, for some reason, they're like, oh, well, let's just move on. Let's just look to the future. And the media's along with them. The media is not going to do this on their own. Democrats need to, and you and I need to be demanding that they put some context into these stories, like the Jack Smith story.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And in just a minute, I'll share with you the Jack Smith story, and then we'll pick up your calls, too. Stay with us.